Hey everyone, welcome to Operations, the show where we look under the hood of companies in hypergrowth. My name is Sean Lane. As we all know, AI is all the rage right now. It's easy to get caught up in the hype and just assume that AI is the answer to all of your problems. But in the midst of all this hype, it's important to remember two things. One, AI is not new. And two, AI is a tool to answer problems, not the solution itself. Now, per usual, I can't take credit for these insights on this show. Those lessons were delivered via our guest today, Jana Eggers. Jana is the CEO of Nara Logics, an AI advisor software company. And the reason I was so excited to talk to Jana is that she's an AI practitioner, but she's not new to the AI world like so many of us. Her career has taken her from 3-person businesses to 50,000-person enterprises. She's done everything from opening the European logistics optimization software offices as part of American Airlines, to natural language processing at Lycos back in 1996, to founding Intuit's corporate innovation lab, to get this, researching conducting polymers at Los Alamos National Laboratory. I had the chance to catch up with Jana in person as part of our series of episodes from Startup Week Boston at Suffolk University. And in our conversation, Jana brings a healthy skepticism to help us separate the AI hype from the utility. We dig into what she sees companies getting wrong about AI and why she believes that AI augments human intelligence but doesn't mimic it. Also, be sure to stick around until the end of the episode for one of my favorite lightning rounds we've ever done. To start though, when I was prepping for this interview, something that Jana had written intrigued me. She said, quote, "I support, subscribe, and contribute to ethical, explainable, and deployable AI." So my first question naturally was, what does that mean?
Well, I think most people get the ethics. Unfortunately, as I was just having a conversation after the session with someone who said, how do we get more people to worry about the ethics? And I said, well, people are worried about the ethics at the high level. It's that bridge there. And so those three aren't separate. The deployable ethics are really important. Like, how do we actually make them work in real life situation, and they're not just something posted on our website? What does it mean to them? And so the ethics part, I think we understand more than we do. Probably a lot like revenue operations, right? We think we understand it a lot more than we do, which is why we need someone like you.
Appreciate that.
The second part of explainability is just wicked fun for me. So explainability can be, as little as kind of saying, okay, what are the major factors to this, right? Which is a pretty easy analysis. It's been around for a while. That's what I was using, 30 years ago, and it's still valid these days. What we do is a bit more special than that. We're really tracing information all the way through to how it impacts the model as well as how it impacts the answer. And so we call it Explainability 360, which is what if my signal didn't activate anything in the network, what activated something, and then what on the answer side was unactivated. And it gets really nerdy as to why you need all of that. But if you have problems where the answer and understanding what drove that answer is really important, that's where we are. So we work in defense and intelligence, and you can imagine how important that is in there. We work in healthcare, and you can imagine why that's important. And then on the financial services side, it's all about regulatory. So it's, for them to be able to say, no, I know why this model is working this way and what makes a difference. And then deployable, there's a lot of AI that's just in POC stage. And I'm not saying that's bad. That's awesome. People are learning about AI. But most AI projects fail, like most startups fail. It's actually pretty close to the same number in terms. They're both in the 90s of projects that fail. And so we work with our customers, and I've worked it throughout my career, is really focused on how do I get this into production? How do I get people to use it? Even back at Los Alamos, where I was doing conducting polymer work, I was the theoretician on the team. I was a mathematician, computer scientist, but I worked with chemical engineers, and they're really material scientists. And so they would ask me, I would come up with this beautiful model and say, this is the best conductivity you're going to get out of this. And they would go in and say, but why? And so that's when I got passionate about explainability is how do I explain to someone why they should actually use the answer that I'm giving? And that's the only way you're going to get deployable.
Right. And I would imagine too, like the thing I had appreciated the most about our last conversation in preparation for today and some of the things I've read that you've either written or given interviews about is that AI is not the solution, right? It is a mechanism to get to the solution. And I would imagine that being able to explain and deploy that solution, that mechanism, then makes it easier once you do actually arrive at the answer to the problem. But that's just a means to get there. Am I thinking about that right?
Absolutely. I, getting nerdy again.
Please.
AI is really a system of systems thing. So it's one system that always fits within another lots of systems. And you can have simple systems like when you look at a ChatGPT or something. That's still a system. It's still taking some input from you, giving you some output. But that input part and that output part are not the AI. The AI is this one. So even in a basic situation like that, but normally you're looking to do something else with that. You're not just looking for that as a point solution on its own. So now you're seeing how do we integrate ChatGPT into dev environments, right? For coding. And people focus on, the ChatGPT is doing the coding. It's giving some suggestions there, but there's a lot of other things around that in terms of how do I make sure it knows the right environment that it's writing code for? And my engineers regularly use it because they're looking for idea. It's kind of like their idea sparring partner, if you will. But for the code that they actually use to deploy, it's not usually that close to what ChatGPT first did. It was more someone that's like, oh, did you think about this or did you think about that? But the environment that they're going into, how it fits within the code that we have already, like, what random next word generation, it's not random, sorry, what statistically next coding word generation does is different from how we have coding standards within our organization. So that's what I mean by it's not going to stand alone there. It's actually fitting in within a whole system. And our engineers have had to learn more rather than writing code. They've had to learn more how to read code is just one quick example, right? That's a change in the system that we're experiencing as a whole.
And I think, everyone, and today and this event this week is a great example of this. Everyone wants to participate in conversations like this, but I think so many folks have this ChatGPT example as kind of a jumping off point. How are you teaching people to kind of broaden themselves beyond that specific example that a lot of people have become very comfortable with very quickly and be able to be comfortable in using the type of language you might use with a client or in a project so that they can participate in these types of conversations at if ChatGPT is 101, get us up to the 201 level?
What I love, and I was worried when ChatGPT first got all of its big hype, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be a headache. And it's actually been wonderful. I actually even told my board this morning. We had a board meeting. And I said, it's actually been less worse than I expected, which says a lot. And the reason for that is I think it's given us a common experience. I shouldn't say language, it's because it's not language, but it's given us a common experience where we all had those answers that were like, oh, how did it come up with this? It's amazing. And we've all had those wah, wah. And we've all had the middle of the road. So we've had this kind of common experience and we can laugh about some of the things and we can, complain about some of the things and we can be excited about some of the things, but it's given people more of an idea. Oh, wait, AI in general might be like that too. It's not just ChatGPT. It's all types of AI may have that, wow, very bad. Right. And so I think that experience, so now I can more say, because most people before I could say things like, do you ever use Waze? You know how sometimes it's like right on, but then other times it's kind of like, well, wait, they just shuttled me and everybody else off on the same street. And now this tiny little street is, and so you can talk about that kind of thing, about the real-timeness of AI and stuff like that, but they don't really connect with it because they didn't see the other options. But with ChatGPT, they're often like, oh, it said this. What if I modify my prompt this way, right? And so they're starting to learn more and be more interactive rather than having a pretty hard shell on top of it that they can't quite, penetrate into and really understand what's happening with the AI.
It's pretty interesting that after decades spent as a practitioner in the AI world, even Jana found that ChatGPT offered this new common experience through which we can all similarly understand the utility of AI. But remember, AI is the tool, not the solution. And Jana's mission is to contribute to ethical, explainable, and deployable AI. So I was really curious, what did she mean when she said that ChatGPT wasn't as bad as she thought it was going to be?
People have been less wowed by it than I expected.
Okay.
So I really did expect that people would give it more the benefit of the doubt than they did. So I'll give you an example. Kind of early on, I had a friend who said, oh my gosh, I asked ChatGPT to give me like a day in I can't remember where in Italy it was, but she was going to Italy and it just gave me this incredible day in Italy. And I was like, well, did you do it? She goes, oh, well, I haven't gone yet. And then I said, oh, I was like, well, what made you think it was incredible? Well, it sounded good. Right. And so like kind of as I peeled the onion, I understood more that she hadn't really questioned it. She thought it was magic. And what I've seen more is that people are questioning it, or they're asking things that matter to them, or they're asking it things that they're specialized in, rather than plan me a vacation in Italy where I didn't really know what I wanted and I questioned it. And so I did ask her, I said, hey, what about if you ask it to do the same thing for your hometown? And then see how you feel about it. And I was just curious. And she came back to me. She was like, you know what? She lives in New York. She was like, it gave me things that I could never do in one day. And she was like, do you think I'm going to experience that when I go? And I was like, well, you may.
And this is something you've talked about a lot more broadly, which is just the idea that humans should be skeptical about the different use cases that they are experiencing with AI. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the pictures I showed was something that went viral 6 months or so ago, and it was a guy smoking in a McDonald's or something.
Okay.
And people were like, "Oh my God, can you believe this?" And there was political, as you can imagine, overtones there of the type of person that would do something horrendous like that. Yeah. And if you looked at it, I mean, even more than cursory before you forwarded it, you could see the guy had 6 fingers. Yeah. I mean, anything you kind of look at with it for AI, like if you know AI, it's like, look at the ears, look at the fingers, it's like his shirt was like really kind of weird. Like it was half one kind of shirt and half another. And it was, I mean, really, really clearly AI generated. In my opinion, like it was a Coca-Cola cup that looked like Coca-Cola, but the lettering was totally off. Yeah. It was scribbled. So there were things, but it was forwarded. I mean, the amount of forwarding that happened, and that's what somebody was tracking is, look how forwarded and riled up people got about this. And it was clearly an AI-generated image. I mean, really clearly. And I think people are wanting to find things like that, like this jerk who is, smoking in a McDonald's, and they want to have that, and they're losing their thinking brain, and that's where I'm like, look, guys, you have to realize so much can be AI generated now that you have to really question, like when you see, and even stuff we saw this happening that was before, the big AI was doing it. It's just like Nancy Pelosi when that. Recording was of her slurring, all that was done is they slowed down her voice. She wasn't slurring. That was a recording that slowed down her voice to make her sound like that. That wasn't AI. So it's not that we haven't had this before. It's just that there's two things that are happening. The amount is increasing like unbelievably because it's so easy to do. And then the second thing is people are getting highly targeted. So they know who is going to forward this and get riled up about it. And that is AI. AI is doing that targeting where they're just going in. They're like, this person is going to forward it to their, 280 followers, but they have 1 million of those people that are doing that.
Again, it bears repeating that Jana has been working with AI for decades. So while the AI hype has become more pervasive, it's not new. And Jana's saying that in addition to the improvements to large language models, we're more aware of AI for two reasons. One, the volume of use cases is increasing. And two, people are being highly targeted by AI with AI-driven content. All right, I want to shift gears away from some of these consumer use cases and get back to AI in the B2B context. Given Jana's own work at Nara Logics and with some of her customers, I wanted to understand what she sees companies getting wrong when it comes to using AI in their businesses.
They think it's magic. Like I said, they're believing that the AI is smarter than them. And I'm not saying that it's not smarter. It's probably just seeing things differently. I like to think of it kind of like as a prism or something. And it's like, hey, I'm looking at it this way and you're looking at it this way. And it doesn't mean that that's not valid. And it could be interesting for some things, like why does it do it that way? Understanding that more. But I think that this idea that because the model is taking in more information, it's smarter than us. So it's reading all of the encyclopedias, so it gets it. And it doesn't necessarily, because it doesn't have, it's just a next word. I mean, if you're talking about ChatGPT, it's just a really smart next word generator. It's not understanding anything. That doesn't mean it can't come up with something creative, right? At all. But it's us evaluating that rather than it evaluating it. And so it didn't go in and go, ooh, this is a good answer. I will give this answer. It's just like, this is what I was trained to do. So that's what I'm doing. So I think that's the biggest thing that people are getting wrong, that amount of data matters, the right type of data, how that data is curated, how that data is then ingested and used, and what the purpose of that was. One of my customers did this, which was totally cool. They wrote me and they were like, have you ever asked ChatGPT to say, can I use, compare for me using Nara Logics Synaptic Intelligence Platform, which is the name of our product, and ChatGPT for decision making. And it came right out and said, I'm a language model. I don't make decisions. It's like there, and it actually gave a really good result. Like, I was like, this is brilliant. Why did we never think of this?
Put this in our marketing.
And I honestly, when he texted me and told me he did that, I was like, oh no. And I rolled my eyes and I was like, it's going to give some bogus answer. It was actually really good. And I was impressed with it. It's so much so that we played around with it and we're like, this is really good. And the funniest thing that happened there is it really talked about decisioning and reasoning, didn't even talk about explainability. And I feel like if you go onto our website, you just see explainability is all over there. So it wasn't just comparing what it thinks about itself and what we think about ourselves. It was actually doing some pretty insightful stuff, and I was like, "Hey, I feel really good about this."
So I actually was looking at the website, and no, that's great because I was looking at the website myself, and I loved the succinctness of some of the definitions that you all apply to help people to be able to have these conversations. And so you actually started to talk about this on your website. You say AI is the ability to use computer power to acquire and apply knowledge and skills in new ways. AI augments human intelligence; it does not mimic it. And I think the point you were making about how the models are trained and the data you bring into that is critical. So how do we better understand either if we're using something like ChatGPT or we're creating something or on our own within our companies, how do we better understand the inputs that are going in to then help us understand and explain the outputs that come out?
Yeah, there's a couple of things, and redirect me if I'm going the wrong direction on this as far as what you think is useful. So one thing I talk to people about is, a computer computes. So think about a calculator. When I talk, seriously, but when I'm talking about, you understand this, you've used a calculator, but when I'm talking about statistically generated, it's just looking at order of words and figuring out in certain contexts. This is why parameters are important, because parameters give you context, right? What is the right order of words to put out there? You don't think that way at all. That is not even close. You have a lot more conceptualization. They don't have much. There's a little bit, but it's a very thin layer. This is when you talk about what are the hidden nodes in the neural net. There isn't really. We haven't proven that there's any conceptualization there. Maybe a little bit, but there, and people are still trying to figure out what are those nodes. But it's more, I just got the statistics right. Then I understood that when I talk about an animal, that animal could be a pet or not be a pet. Just as an example, it doesn't have that kind of concept. Now, there may be things like wild animals versus pets, and there's things that look like intelligence of understanding that, but it's really just what gets correlated when something's a wild animal versus what gets correlated when something is a pet, right? So wild animals don't usually have leashes. Pets do. So a leash is going to be talked about more when you talk about a pet than it is a wild animal. Just as a quick example. So you have to think about what it's really doing, and it's really just computing.
Jana's advice here is simple. Think about where a computer can actually help you to compute. And she goes further in some of her writings to say that AI should be designed for subject matter experts rather than technical ones. So maybe if you're in your company and you're looking for ways to leverage this tool to arrive at the outcomes you want, starting with areas in which you are a subject matter expert might make a lot of sense. I asked Jana if this was the right way to take her advice, and how does she go about coaching people to find the right use cases that will actually be helpful for them?
One quick example, and it comes from, the software engineering side. I mentioned coding.
Yeah.
And AI, Amazon just recently said, Andy Jassy said, hey, we just saved $250 million, I think it was, with AI, replacing software engineering tasks. And if you read it, so first of all, that's like 0.03% of their budget. So as a startup, you think about saving 0.03 and it's kind of like, okay, nice. I get that it's good for them and I get that it will grow. So please, I'm not poo-pooing that, but you have to understand perspective, because that sounds really big, but it is honestly very tiny for even them, who, by the way, are some of the world leading experts in this. So they're just now getting these tiny numbers. That was 0.03%, by the way, not 3%.
Wow.
0.03% of, and it was 0.4% if you look at, depending on which budget you're looking at. So you're looking at operating costs versus R&D. And so you can kind of mess around, but this is probably operating, because the actual problem they were solving was software updates. So this is where I'm using this library. The library has a new version, and every engineer knows they kind of go in, they press the button, they wait, did it compile correctly? Did it integrate correctly? Depending on how they're doing it. And then they run the tests, right? And so it's usually a 15-minute task or so, depending on how big it is and stuff. It can be 5, it can be 35, but it's not a big task. This isn't an hour-long task unless you're doing a whole bunch of them. And you're basically clicking a few buttons and hoping there's no problems and running your fleet test and all of that. So that's what they saved. That's what they automated.
That's helpful perspective.
And so, that wasn't really coding, which is what most people think that is happening there.
Time.
It was really an automation task. And how much of AI that really was, it probably was some, but not a lot. But there were a lot of things that you wired together to get there. And again, I'm not inside Amazon. I just read. I went through and was like, okay, what did they really do? And it's like, oh, they're saving on the update times. I'm like, what did they mean by update time? I peel that onion to really understand better. And again, I am not saying that is not important. I mean, trust me, my engineers would love it.
Yep.
So that's not, but is that going to save me 250 million? Not even close. Is it going to save me 0.03%? Maybe, and I'm not sure I care that much about that right now. So look at the problems that are really going to have an impact on you. Understand that where is it that you're struggling? Where do you have those subject matter experts? Where do you have people that you can really empower? Like radiologists is an example that's often used with AI. So fascinating thing that I just learned a couple of weeks ago is that actually the number of radiologists have increased since we've had AI to help. And it's a dramatic increase. And why is that? Because we've now been able to increase the throughput of testing. So before, when we used to have a radiologist take more time, now they can take less time. There's a great example of a subject matter expert that was just empowered by AI because the machine is doing the part that they used to get bleary-eyed and they were tired and things like that. And now they have this machine going, hey, look at this area right here. Right? And that's great. And now they can provide some explainability like, yeah, that does look suspicious. It can also, the AI also helped with, this needs to be retaken. This isn't good enough, right? So you don't even have a radiologist looking at it at that point. So why have radiologists increased when we've actually, decreased the time in their job? It's because I've actually increased their workload, right? I mean, I've actually now can do more tests. Yeah. I can find out right then rather than having to reschedule another appointment because we find out after the radiologist read it. Right then, there's an AI saying that's not a good enough image. And so right then I can retake the thing, which means I get many, many more people in. And therefore, I now need more radiologists.
If I'm a subject matter expert, and let's keep going with the radiologist example, there's a lot of noise right now, right? There's so much noise. How do I know when it's worth it for me, my company, my product, whatever, to build something that is net new to add to that yield that you're going to get out of a radiologist versus leveraging some of the other tools or models or whatever that might be already out there? Like this is not a new problem, build versus buy versus partner, whatever. How do I think about that if I truly believe I'm a subject matter expert in a particular topic?
I mean, it depends. Like we're here at Startup Week, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, so what I'd say is, hey, there's a lot of opportunity to start new businesses for that, right? Finding the right subject matter experts and saying, hey, this is a tool I can sell to many businesses. A lot of businesses, it's probably not worth it for them really, going in and building all of your own models. That takes a lot of work
and money
and money and special expertise that you probably don't have. So I do think that a buy strategy is good. The question is what you're buying. So I always talk to people about, hey, I'm honestly a build strategy because you're building me into your product. So I'm more selling to people who are building large complex systems and they need me because I have to integrate in a special way. I'm more going to sell to Salesforce than sell to you using Salesforce.
Got it.
Right? And so that's kind of the difference. So you have to think about where you are in that. Like if I had a quick little app, and we've talked about, we have some ideas like that we would package up, but it's hard for me to make that decision when I'm still doing, our software is 6 to 7 figures.
You're further upstream in this problem.
I'm further upstream in that problem. That doesn't mean that at some point I won't go, hey, look, there is an opportunity. I know this one problem well, and I can, package it in a certain way that I can integrate with. I'm just going to say Salesforce because it's a well-known platform, and I can package that up. And by the way, with that, rather than, I'm definitely very hands-on and close to my customers. But for that, I can do more of a, hey, anybody can just sign up and get this and run away with it, which is pretty cool. And again, it'd have to be something where explainability is really important there for us.
And how do we think about, so this is an interesting question. So I just had somebody on the show recently who was basically talking about how the end users at the end of everything we just described, the Salesforce users, they're going to have a pretty wide variety of problems. And to your point, there might be some subject matter experts or unique data sets that can plug into Salesforce and solve problem A, so a different one can solve problem B. But as the end user, I don't care. I just want the answer, right? And so if Salesforce app A solves problem A for me, I'm going to go back to them and be like, look, I got problem B here. Can you just do this too, right? Instead of me now going out and getting B and C and D and adding those all on. So where do you think that's going to go? Is Salesforce app A going to end up being the one that like just keeps tacking on more and more use cases and subject matter expertise so that I can do everything I need to do there? Or am I going to end up the same way we are right now, which is I need to integrate 25 different apps into my stack that all happen to solve different problems, leveraging AI, but it's really not the same?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of going to depend on how much you need that subject matter expertise, how much A and B really interact with each other, how separate are they? You know, we've dealt and lived in a world where things are pretty separate. I mean, I'm constantly amazed at, our customers where like supply chain and marketing won't even share data across. They all got, and I'm working with very large enterprises, so it happens. They're territorial. Doesn't happen as much in mid and small companies, but I think you got to think about those kinds of things. Are people going to share their data? Are they going, and does that matter? So if I'm in A and B where the data doesn't matter if it's shared and, it's different people using it and, maybe there's a little bit of interaction, then that matters less. But if it really is something that's core, and I mean, you've seen that Salesforce adds stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, they make irrelevant apps that are in their marketplace on a regular basis, right? Because they're trying to expand their market. So it's not a problem that we haven't seen before. And I think that that's going to work out the same. I think or similarly, I shouldn't say the same. I do think what's different is that AI doesn't just require coding, and algorithms, I should say. It requires data. And so who has that data is the real challenge. And so, you may be using a foundational model that's open source, but what is your specialty? What's really being added on? That's going to be the biggest challenge for startups themselves. And then the question is going to become, okay, well, if you're on a platform like that, how much does Salesforce share with you? And, and rightfully share with you, meaning they have permission to do that because I'm their customer. And if, I have your data, then, I'm able to customize whatever I'm doing with that. And so my basic point there is it's much more complicated now. We know how to do these things, but we don't know them at the level of complexity that we have been doing.
I really like how Jana breaks down for us the marketplace dynamics that are changing versus what's staying the same. According to her, while something like the Salesforce App Exchange likely isn't going anywhere, the new wrinkle in all of these apps that are promising AI-driven outcomes is data. AI requires data. What's unique about your data that your app can bring to the table that others can't? The data on which these solutions are trained is the moat to differentiate one solution versus a sea of others. Which brings me to the least sexy word in all of these AI conversations: governance. Look, I know I don't really want to talk about it either, but your IT team is going to ask you about it, so you might as well be prepared. Jana, of course, sees the most rigorous version of this conversation through her work with her defense clients. But for the startup folks walking around at Startup Boston Week, I asked her how they should think about governance when it comes to AI. Her answer wasn't what you might expect.
Yeah, I think in startups, it's really about your ethics, which overlays with your governance. So how, I'll give you a little bit of an example. So one of the companies that I ran was a company, Spreadshirt, still around, great company. It's kind of like Vistaprint, more in Europe, but also have more focused on clothing and higher quality and things like that. But for personalization, we allowed anybody to put whatever they wanted on a shirt, but there's a lot of things people will put on their shirts that all of us, well, I wouldn't say all of us, some of us, most of us would be like, ooh. And so we had a very open policy. And one of them was that anyone that was doing quality control could say, I don't approve of this. And we had a process that we would go through and talk about it together. And we would then go back to that person and say, hey, we decided, yes, we agree with you. Dogfighting isn't something that we're going to print, and we're going to do these things to curb that. Then we had other things that were copyrights, right? And Mickey Mouse ears is a good example. Yeah. And so we had a lot of education too, where, and not everybody knows every copyright. We can't, right? And so there was a lot of education. There was a lot of communication. And one of the things that I'm very proud of that we did is because of that, we actually would get, and by the way, it was a German-based company. And in Germany, basically, you're guilty until proven innocent. I don't mean that in general, but in this kind of case, you basically get a fine, and then you have to prove that you don't have to pay that fine. Mm. And we paid very, very little. And it was all because we were very clear. We had a process that this wasn't something like, oh, we'll meet when we meet, and if something comes up. And it was documented. We had minutes. We could show the people. We could show the judge, hey, here's why. Here's what we decided. Here are the things we talked about. And that's why, we in general didn't pay fines. That doesn't mean that we may have still made a decision and removed something off of our marketplace and things like that. But we had a process, and that's what people were more interested in. And so that's what I'd say is, have a process that follows your values. And our values were, don't infringe on copyrights. That's just uncool. We were more wanting to enable artists. I don't want artists stepping all over each other. And then the second thing is support your people. If they're uncomfortable with something, let's figure out why and then give them that feedback. And so those were our values, and we had very clear governance. And so as an example with that, we work in defense and military. That's a sensitive subject. And so we talk in our team about it. We talk about it regularly. We tell people, hey, if you have any issue, come and talk to the management team about it. We fully support you. We're not in a place where we can say, okay, we can have people that do that and people that don't. We all work on it. So it's something we're upfront about when we're recruiting. And it's something that we openly talk about as a team. And we also it's like, if anything that a customer says makes you feel janky, talk to us about it and let's talk through it and see where we are. I don't want our product used in an unethical way, but I also want, us to help not make mistakes, which is where I think explainability is key. Because if I say, for example, this is going to be targeted, I want to know all the reasons that tells me why that's going to be targeted, right? That's going to be targeted whether they have my system in there or not. And that's just the reality. I want to be in there so I make sure we know the pedigree of that data, right? The provenance of that data so that I can communicate more clearly, not just because the AI thinks that it's there. I want to know what all led to that. And that's why I feel like for us and for me personally, it's a responsibility because I know AI can do this.
I think, first of all, that is incredibly admirable and should be commended. And I also, what I'm hearing from you is that the time you take to actually codify those values, talk about them, write them down, and then continue to reiterate them amongst your team, that's where they kind of come to life and live and breathe. And I also think the really hard part about that, it sounds like you all are living and breathing really well, is the idea that there's no daylight between you and the rest of your leadership team on these things, because at the end of the day, these things have to come from the top down. You could have the best intentioned copyright infringement analyst person sitting there at their desk trying to do their gig, but if that's not something that's been prioritized by the organization and said out loud that this is the way we do it, and then that backed up through actions, then it doesn't matter.
And by the way, it's hard. I mean, it takes effort. That's not, it's not something that I can just say, oh, my legal team's going to handle the copyright infringement. Right? I mean, we could have done that. And I'm sure, and by the way, an amazing legal team. They were brilliant. But they also knew that they were not the owners of it, of the process. They couldn't be. They were the guiders. They were the ones that helped us frame it. But they weren't the people that were sitting in quality control every day. Right? They couldn't see what was actually happening. I mean, we could have put a legal person there, but it wouldn't have been the best use of their time, right? Yeah. So we had to really get people understanding why we were doing this and why it was important to us as a company. And we openly, by the way, also talked in the company about, hey, we got sued by these people. Not sued, we got fined through the process, blah, blah. To me as an American, I'm just always like, yeah, we sue everything. They would always laugh. You Americans. And I always told them, I was like, look, we have bigger judgments, but you guys have more often judgments. I mean, that's the way. It's like you're just used to $10,000 all the time, and we get these $10 million every now and then, and we don't get the $10,000 all the time. So, but you had to get people involved in that and have them understand, no, we're not just making this up, right? Like, this is happening all the time.
Before we go, at the end of each show, we're going to ask each guest the same lightning round of questions. Ready? Here we go.
Best book you've read in the last 6 months?
Oh, man, that's hard. And I think you may have told me that you would ask me this, and I probably gave you a different answer then because I love books. I'm really a believer in the anxious generation. So I love Jonathan Haidt. First of all, I think he's a fascinating author, and he wrote The Righteous Mind, which is the first book that I read from him. But it's really, the anxious generation is about, and I think every school teacher should read this because school teachers have such a big impact on our kids' lives. But this is really, what screen time is doing to brains. And it's not just you'll learn for you and what the screen time is doing to your brain, but also for your kids and what's really happening there. And in particular, as I am female, and what it's doing to young women is just traumatic and scary. And by the way, it's not just in the US, it's globally.
Yeah.
And they have all the numbers to show that. So
I just bought that book. I haven't opened it yet, but I'm going to now.
You'll devour
definitely.
it, I promise.
Normally I ask favorite part about working in operations. You're honorary here today. So favorite part about working with operations.
I feel like I'm in operations every day
there
too. I've done so many startups, but I've never had the title of COO. What I would say is, to me, operations just empowers everyone. Like, when you have a great operations person, they're the person that just is getting shit done, right? You're like cleaning up. It's like you just make these amazing problems go away, to where the rest of us are like, I don't even understand how you do that. I don't get like how you make sure these things happen. And I'll give you a, tiny trivial example, but this is what operations to me, like, just an example that someone said, the other day we had a conference room table that broke, and I was in a meeting and I bought a conference room table. While we were in the meeting, it broke. And before the meeting ended, I had bought a conference room table. That to me says everything about operations. Like, it's the people that just see the broken thing and fix it. And this person responded to me, and she was like, I can't believe you just take care of stuff like that. I've never been in a company where things are just handled. And I'm like, and I thought about it for a minute, and I'm like, first of all, I'm insane. But secondly, it's really because you haven't been in a company that valued operations like that. And that's a trivial example, like I said, but I think it's exactly that kind of thing where people are looking for problems and making things operate.
Yeah. But it also shows you, like, and I've had this happen to me too, where like it's rare enough for people to take the time to remark on it, right? Like, that thing that I told you everything I wanted, you just did it. Right? Like, it's crazy. Anyways, flip side, least favorite part about working in ops.
I think that there's a lot of people that don't realize that is what I'd say the least, like, they don't realize I just made your life better. Like, I really, like, you were complaining about that and I just made your life better. And I think sometimes that happens because people don't tell you what their real problems are. They don't really tell you their whole life. And so operations people that are amazing are the ones that are asking like, okay, tell me about that again. And how do you do that? And I just actually upstairs gave an example of so Intuit does a lot of customer visits. And we were at a customer once and they're like, oh my gosh, that report, because we were studying a certain area, that revenue report, oh my gosh, that's the most important report that we ever use. It really is like, oh, you designed that? Oh my God. Whoa, I love that report. And then you go, oh, cool. Can you show me? And they were like, oh, remember the most important report that they looked at every day. They didn't know the password to get on. They didn't know once we went and got the password. I mean, we didn't. They did.
Yeah.
They got the password. They logged on. They didn't know how to navigate to get to it. Turns out it was a report that was printed out once a month, and they hardly looked at it. So people kind of try and create things maybe around what you're asking, maybe because you had a bias and you went in and asked them about this revenue report, then they're going to love it. There's a lot of subtlety there, I would say. And so that's the worst part is when people aren't excited about what you did. My guess is it's probably because you misunderstood what their real problem was. And that's not on you. I mean, they probably told you something different than really is their problem.
We could do a whole episode just on that answer alone.
Have me back.
Yeah,
I'll talk to you about at Intuit. I did over 500 customer visits myself. So over the years, mostly with small businesses. So I have many, many tales to tell.
I would love that. Someone who impacted you getting to the job you have today.
Wow. Sorry. The thing that came to mind immediately is someone who's passed. And this weekend I was cleaning out a storage space that I have. And I came across a letter from John Holland, who is really one of the founders of AI. He actually invented genetic algorithms. That's what he's best known for, but really understands AI. And I had met him. I was fortunate enough to meet him, and he got engaged in my problem. And he just wrote me this brilliant letter that honestly I had forgotten about. But as I read it, I was like, this is why I do what I do, because someone like him asked me questions. He engaged with me. He was writing me saying, I really think you need to go to graduate school for this, but here are these questions. And he said, as you can see, this letter handwritten by someone brilliant, famous, and all this. And he says, as you can see, I have more questions, so we must meet again soon.
That's amazing.
And like that kind of impact, he's not the only one, but that kind of impact that you have on someone, not just giving your advice, but actually engaging with them, that has a huge impact. And I was so grateful that I found that letter, and I didn't just throw it away because there were a lot of boxes. I was like, I'm just going to go. I'm not even going to look. And I was like, oh, but I can't. And I found that letter. That was worth all the hours that I've spent on that just to see that.
Thank you for sharing that. That's an awesome story. All right, last one. One piece of advice for people who want to have your job someday.
Don't do it. No, I'm sorry.
Run far, far away.
Run. Don't do startups. They're insane. No. Honestly, it's not all that it's cracked up to be. So really think about what your motivation is. I have so many people say, oh, you're a CEO, so you're the boss of everyone. I'm like, I am the boss of no one at all, not even my dog. Because really, if you're doing it right, you're responsible to your employees, you're responsible to your customers, you're responsible to your board. So if that's your motivation, you can find other ways of bossing people around it's going to bring you much more joy. So I would say, if you want my job, start understanding how you understand customers. Find an area that you're really passionate about. I mean, again, reading that letter from John, it made me remember again that I started out at Los Alamos. So this is when I was at Los Alamos, and I started there. And when I would give answers to, the material scientists that were there as the computer person, they would say, but why? And so that's really what started me on my journey. And that always making the technology tell me but why has been a big thread, not the only thread through my career. And it's one of those things where I backed up and said, I'm where I'm supposed to be. So what is your, but why, which is the explainability piece of what I'm doing? It doesn't always go direct. I didn't get to answer that at every place. So understand where your passion is. You don't always get to do what you're passionate about, but you can often find it. There's a lot more flexibility than people think in their roles. They don't have to do the role the way that
the bullets on the job description said.
Exactly. You have a lot more flexibility. Now that takes courage because people will put you down. And trust me, I've been put down. I'm a woman in tech. I've been put down a lot. But also I'm kind of weird, as you've probably guessed. And so, there were plenty of people who are like, because she just doesn't know. It's like, no, it's because I know more. And this is why. And, so you have to be okay with that too when you're kind of creating your own job. That may not be your thing. You may not want that too. And like realizing, no, actually, I just want to be good at this rather than I want to be like, pushing those boundaries and doing all that. My job is not one where you just say, hey, I've got a clean desk, I've got an assistant, I'm just that kind of CEO. That's not me. So it depends on what you perceive as my job versus what is my job.
Thanks so much to Jana for joining us on this week's episode of Operations. Also, special shout out to Stephanie, Samantha, and the entire crew at Boston Startup Week at Suffolk University for having us as a guest. If you liked what you heard from the show today, make sure you're subscribed so you get a new episode in your feed every other Friday. Also, if you learned something from Jana today, and how could you not, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, 6-star reviews only. All right, that's going to do it for me. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time.